Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. When my wife and I bought our first home last year in a nice suburban neighborhood, we were excited to finally have a place of our own. The house ticked all our boxes: newly renovated, spacious yard, and even a pool out back. Sure, it was part of a homeowners association, but we didn't think much of it at first. We just wanted a nice home to start our family in. Boy, were we wrong. It all started about a month after we moved in. I was relaxing in the living room one evening when I heard the side gate rattling. I peeked out the window and saw a woman letting herself into my backyard. My first thought was that we were being robbed. I raced outside and confronted the intruder, only to find it was Barbara, the president of the homeowner association. "What are you doing trespassing on my property?" I demanded. Barbara looked at me like I was the one out of line. "I'm doing an inspection to ensure you're adhering to homeowner association guidelines," she replied primly. I was stunned. "You can't just enter my private yard whenever you want." "As homeowner association president, I'm well within my rights to inspect all properties," she said. With that, Barbara turned and continued scrutinizing my backyard, scribbling notes on her clipboard. I stood there fuming as this entitled woman tromped around my yard uninvited. Who did she think she was? When she finally left 10 minutes later, I immediately called a fellow neighbor to vent. "Oh yeah, she does that to everyone," my neighbor said casually. "Just lets herself in through the gate to poke around. Says it's her duty as president." My blood boiled hearing this. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to tolerate Barbara's intrusions. This was my home, not her personal playground. The very next day, I installed a sturdy lock on the gate leading to my backyard. Smugly, I imagined the look on Barbara's face when she realized she could no longer access my yard. A few evenings later, the clicking of the lock echoed in my quiet yard. I watched through the blinds as Barbara grasped at the locked gate in frustration, peering into my backyard longingly. Victory was sweet, but my triumph was short-lived. The very next morning, I opened my front door to find a strongly worded letter from the homeowner association about my unapproved lock installation. Barbara cited some obscure homeowner association rule about how exterior locks needed approval from the board. She demanded I remove the lock immediately or face a fine. I couldn't believe her gall. This wasn't just about some silly rule. This was Barbara flexing her self-appointed power over me. Enough was enough. I immediately called a lawyer to explore my rights in this situation. He informed me that the homeowner association rules did not grant the president authority to access private property without permission. I filed an official complaint and sent Barbara a cease and desist letter. Clearly irritated but unwilling to address me directly, Barbara doubled down. Suddenly, notices appeared on all the neighborhood mailboxes, stating that bi-monthly exterior inspections would now be taking place. Barbara used her homeowner association minions to circumvent my lockout attempts by invading everyone else's property, but I knew her true motive was getting access to my yard. At the next homeowner association board meeting, I showed up with a dozen fellow fed-up neighbors. We confronted Barbara and the board with our complaints, demanding they stop the invasive inspections. The board tried placating us, but I didn't back down. I threatened legal action if the trespassing continued. Soon after, the inspections mysteriously ceased. For a few weeks, I thought Barbara had finally got the message, until one morning when I was mowing the lawn and turned around to find her standing on my driveway. The woman truly had no shame. "I don't know how you got in, but you need to leave. Now," I said. Barbara gestured towards my open garage. The garage was open, so I let myself in. As president, I'm responsible for ensuring all homeowner association rules are followed. That was the last straw. This woman had picked my lock. I marched Barbara out to the sidewalk and called the police to report the break-in. Despite her protests about just doing her presidential duty, the cops sternly warned her to stay off my property. Barbara finally got the reality check she needed. Chastened, she apologized at the next homeowner association meeting, announcing the end of invasive inspections. Victory was mine. My wife and I can finally enjoy our home in peace without that entitled homeowner association president snooping around uninvited. Standing up to Barbara taught me an important lesson. Don't let pushy homeowner association leaders bulldoze over your rights. Your home is your domain, and no pretend authority figure can trespass without permission. I'm just glad I only had to deal with a nosy president, not one who was truly malevolent. But the bottom line remains, Homeowner association leaders need to operate within legal limits, not invent non-existent powers. I'm keeping that lock on my gate as a symbolic reminder that my home is my haven, now and always. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I spent 2 years working for a particular boss, whom I'll call Dan. Dan was, and almost certainly still is, the most unacceptable human being I have ever had the displeasure of encountering. He was a compulsive liar, a narcissist, short-tempered, unethical, unreasonable, unintelligent, and abusive. I once witnessed him spend half an hour shouting at a salesman for wearing shoes that Dan didn't approve of. Not inappropriate shoes, mind you, but just ones that Dan didn't like. The salesman in question could have gone home and changed his shoes in the time that Dan spent cursing him out and belittling him. He also sold a client secondhand computers, claiming they were new and priced as new ones. This man not only assaulted me, but verbally and emotionally abused me for the better part of 2 years, and did everything in his power to keep me under his thumb. He constantly micromanaged me, to the point of just dictating to me what I should write in an email to a client. If it wasn't done exactly his way, it wasn't correct. I had to argue with him just to get a sick day, even though I'm legally entitled to it. I was woefully underpaid and on call 24/7. This made it difficult for me to find other employment and is one of the reasons I stayed as long as I did. He made my life absolutely miserable, and I developed a bit of a drinking problem as a result. I recently watched a presentation on domestic violence, and his behavior is a textbook case of what DV abusers do. I could go on and on about the things that this man did to be the biggest jerk he could be, but this is pro-revenge, not bad bosses, so I'll get to the story. One day, Dan and I had a disagreement about something. I was right, and I had the emails to prove it, and I was frankly fed up with his nonsense. I told him I wouldn't be going to work because I was taking a sick day. He proceeded to shove me down to the ground. He's a big guy, probably one of the reasons he's gotten away with being the human garbage he is for so long, and starts trying to strangle me. I was able to fend him off and escape, and after I did, I filed a police report. There were no witnesses, so that was going to go nowhere. He actually had one of his other subordinates make a claim that the alleged assault didn't happen. Said subordinate wasn't there at the time, so false report. I naturally told everyone I knew and all his clients that contacted me afterward. I was their primary IT support, so quite a few of them had my personal number, that I had filed a police report against him for assault. I specifically said it that way because unlike simply claiming that he assaulted me, telling people I filed a report was unarguably true and not slanderous. A lot of his clients were already not happy with the services he provided, internet and PBX, so that certainly turned a lot of them off of renewing their contracts. A very close family friend of mine, Carol, was naturally one of the first to hear about the assault. I left the country about a month later in search of better opportunities, but my friend remained, and became the chairman of the board of trustees for the body corporate of the neighborhood where Dan lived. A body corporate is basically like an homeowner association, but with different laws governing them. She set her sights on making his life hell. Dan had a broken-down car that had been broken down for over a year at that point. He never had the money to fix it because he's a terrible businessman who never seemed to realize that his business model had really tiny profit margins, and the rules of the neighborhood were changed to force broken-down cars to be towed away. If the owner didn't tow it, the body corporate would, and charge the owner, and fine them. So Dan was fined a few times, not small amounts either, and when he was fined, he did what he always does when things don't go his way, throw a tantrum while having no leg to stand on. The tantrum in this case was several expletive-filled emails to the body corporate, which is just such a great way to endear yourself to someone who already hates you, which got him fined again for breaking the conduct code. This, combined with the loss of revenue for his business, has led to him not having any substantial income for over half a year now. He has no car, nor the money to buy one. Several of his big clients are definitely not going to renew contracts with him, and he appears to no longer have any staff in his employ. Nobody's seen anyone coming to his house in months now, and the body corporate is pressuring his landlord to evict him. He's well and truly messed up. I'm living happily in another country now and got an awesome job that pays 20 times what working for him did. Yes, really, 20 times more money. That's how little I made under him. The next one is a petty revenge story. Backstory: I, 22M, have a twin sister, Karen, 22F, who mostly cares about herself. We both recently graduated college and still live at home, with her room right across the hall from mine. Her boyfriend, John, 22M, stays over a lot on weekends and is pretty much family at this point. However, she treats him poorly, constantly belittling and yelling at him for trivial things. She is a teacher, and he does manual labor. On Saturday morning, I was awakened at 8 a.m. by Karen yelling at John. She wanted him to go to the gym with her, and he wanted to sleep. This happens almost every weekend. I told her to be quiet because I was trying to sleep and also to leave him alone. She responded that she didn't care that I was trying to sleep and that it's 8 a.m. and I should be up anyway. Since she is a teacher, she is on summer break and doesn't need to catch up on sleep during the weekends. Karen ended up leaving and going to the gym without John, but not before she called him lazy, despite the fact that he does manual labor for a living. She also thinks she has the hardest job in the world, and no one could possibly understand how hard it is. I will admit it is hard, but she uses it to diminish the work that everyone else does. Cue the revenge. It just so happens that my parents were leaving on vacation on Monday. This means that Karen and I will have to take care of our dog. Since I have to get up for work, I have morning duty and she has night duty. My mom is an early riser, so my dog goes out at 5 a.m. in the morning. I will have to get up at that time for the next week. So guess who is going to be awakened as well? Karen! And when she gets mad and yells to get out of her room, I will tell her all the things she told me when I wanted to sleep. Sweet dreams. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm the facility manager for my building. Everything that happens and goes wrong is my responsibility, so I make sure everything runs smoothly. My boss has made it clear, it's my building, and I was hired not only to keep people in line, but to run everything. I'm not a jerk, but I hold people accountable, forcibly but politely. There was no facility manager for a long time before I came along, and both clients and employees ran amok with no order. In the 4 months I've been here, my boss has praised my performance and has gone to bat for me countless times. She's the best boss I've ever had. I've got a firm but fair approach, and my reputation reflects that. I've got a Karen in the building, and trust me, the name stereotype applies. She's just a counselor for family services with nothing to do with our group. She likes to complain about everything and gives my boss a headache almost daily. She shares an office with another woman who unfortunately is picking up on her Karen tendencies, Karen in training. I've been doing a keycard audit all week, and I knew to leave Karen's keycard alone because she's the only Karen in the building, so her name stands out. I am missing 75 keycards, with lots of former employees having all-door access dating all the way back to 2015. We can't have that, so I deleted a lot of them, especially if they had a wacky name or just a room number. However, I did delete Kit's card information because it wasn't under her name. She just came to tell me her keycard wasn't working, and Karen happened to be passing by and overheard it. I went and fixed Kit's keycard, and we went to check to see if it worked or not. We found Karen outside the office waiting, complaining to my boss that her keycard didn't work either. Karen wandered away, and my boss rolled her eyes, and I smiled. I told her I would take care of it. After checking to make sure Kit's keycard worked, I went downstairs to check the system, looked up Karen, and wouldn't you know it, her keycard was completely fine. In fact, it showed she had a master keycard. So I changed all of her permissions and limited her back to just her room only. I went upstairs and got my boss's attention because her office is next door to the ladies, and I mouthed, "Listen," and pointed. I opened their door and said, "Hey, Karen, I went and checked your keycard in the system. Everything is good to go. In fact, it said you had a master key to the building. Per the company orders, since you're not a contractor or a company employee, I can't give you that access. So I had to revoke your status to just this room only. Can't have you bugging people on official business. Thanks for bringing your keycard to my attention." She started to object that she needed the master keycard because of XYZ, and I said, "Yeah, sorry, maybe before, but I'm the facility manager, and you don't need access to everything except this office. And if you do, it's outside your pay grade, so you'll have to come get me, okay?" "Cool, thanks, bye." And then I closed the door on her mid-sentence. My boss was quietly laughing her ass off in her office and gave me an air high five. The next one is an entitled people story. I worked at a very nice country club in the dining room /bar. I managed the bar and service staff as well. We were always very busy, and it was generally a good place to work. Being a private club, you can imagine there were plenty of people who felt entitled, usually the older members who had been around forever. New members almost always treated the staff well. On major holidays, we would host a huge brunch from 10-3, and we would be completely full all day. The seating arrangements were meticulously planned several days in advance and only changed as people called in to update their guest numbers. It was like a well-rehearsed play with exquisite timing on our part. We were good at events like this and generally knocked them out of the park. One particular Easter, we were completely full to the gills. Not a single table available at any time during service. I was at the host desk directing everything when I heard a few familiar voices in the stairwell that came from the first-floor carport. It was some of our longtime members known for their poor attitudes. As they were coming up the stairs, I heard the wife ask the husband what time the reservations were for. He told her that they didn't make reservations and that they would just tell the host that they had called, and somehow we messed up. I was instantly upset. The day had been super smooth up until this issue. About 8 of this family appeared at the host desk, so I told the host to go check on the servers, and I would take care of these people. They immediately stepped up and gave me their name and said they had a reservation for 8. I said, "Unfortunately, we don't have anything written in for you. Whom did you talk to make the reservation?" He gave me a displeased look and said the bookkeeper answered the phone and took the reservation. I proceeded to tell him that I was sorry, but we had no room for them, unless they wanted to sit downstairs in the men's locker room lounge. This was not acceptable, and they started to throw a fit. I apologized and tried to clarify who and when the reservation call was made. He almost immediately told me they had called 3 weeks prior. At this point, I said, forget it. I was tired of these entitled individuals who think they can treat people poorly because they have money. I decided to call the man out on what I had heard as they were coming up the stairs. The look on his face was priceless. He protested and said I misunderstood, so I recounted the conversation word for word. At that point, he knew he was in trouble and demanded a table anyway without acknowledging the lies he was telling. I told them that there was a 0% chance of them getting a table and that they should try McDonald's. This didn't go over well, and he turned to storm out and looked back to say he would have me fired. I said, "You are probably right, but at least I'm not a liar." I knew this was not going to go well for me, but I was over this job. He went over my GM's head and went right to the board of directors. They called me in for an executive committee meeting 3 days later. I got to the meeting and that individual was sitting in on the meeting. As they began to ask me about the events, I told them the truth and called him out in front of everyone. He was absolutely livid. The board was stunned because that was not the version he had told them. They immediately asked him to leave the meeting and he stormed out. The board all looked at me and shook their heads. They sympathized with me but told me that it was probably best to part ways. I agreed and told them that I understand being the scapegoat, but I wanted some compensation for the trouble and to keep my mouth shut. They offered me $1,000 and wished me well. I found out later that they put this individual on the public shame board, which was a bulletin outside the men's and women's locker rooms. This was normally reserved for people who didn't pay their accounts, but someone decided to use this for a different reason. I heard later that he resigned in shame. Forget that guy. The next one is an entitled parent story, so some context here. I'm a 28-year-old F28 and had my daughter, Ida, 3 months ago with my wife, Taylor, who is 35 years old, F35. My stepmother, Mary, is 45, and my stepbrother, Tom, is 11. Tom and I weren't close until I was pregnant. During the pregnancy, he became really interested in me and the baby, and actually became quite clingy and needy toward me. I felt weird, but when I tried to retreat, Mary and my dad said I was being cruel and miserable, and I had the chance to be a good sister, but was being selfish and rejecting him. Along with the pregnancy hormones, it made me feel guilty, so I let him still come around a lot. Taylor has a chilled attitude, so she has kept calm and just said she wants what I want, even though he has become resentful of her. I made it clear she was my wife, and any disrespect to her would mean he had to leave. He became focused on my bump and was touching it all the time. Mary thinks he's autistic, but no doctor has ever diagnosed him. I had Ida 3 months ago, and she's the best baby ever. She's so perfect, and I've loved seeing my wife become a mother. She's a natural at it, and it's deepened our love for each other. I've decided to breastfeed and then pump so Taylor can use the bottle to feed as well. It's been going pretty smoothly, And honestly, it's something that allows us to bond with Ada. Often, Taylor will lay with me while I breastfeed, and we will spend time together with Ida sleeping on my chest. Apparently, Tom was very angry when he wasn't allowed into the hospital to see me or the baby, and he kicked off when we said only my mom and mother-in-law were allowed over until 2 weeks postpartum. When they did come over, he kept touching Ida's face, even though we had asked not to, as we are both in the medical profession and don't want to expose our newborn to germs. When we had to get firm, Mary told us we were being horrible to a child and needed to stop. I had to feed, so I went to the nursery, but he had followed. And when I started feeding, he came in and watched, before I realized he was there, and he started asking me questions about breastfeeding. That was fine. But he's been watching me feed whenever he comes over when I don't realize. And then whenever he's been near me, he started saying, "Booby," and reaching for my boobs, saying he wants to try. And it's unfair, only Ida gets it. We've tried reminding him that he's a big boy and she's only a baby. But then last week I woke up from a post-feeding nap to find him laid on top of me with his hands and face on my chest area. When we tried telling Mary and my dad that this was getting out of hand, she said we were discriminating against his autism. And we just didn't understand that I was his special person he focused on, and I should be honored. I told her it had to stop as I was uncomfortable, and Mary said if I wanted him to stop, I would have to stop breastfeeding as it was cruel to tease him without. This is stupid, right? My boobs did get significantly bigger during my pregnancy and have stayed that way after giving birth, so I could see how he would notice them, but it still feels wrong. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.